South Africa is on a race to inoculate as many at-risk people as possible. The Western Cape government has released its vaccination timetable. It aims to inoculate over 719,000 people over 60 by the end of June, and then start with the over 40s, and then, of course, gradually progressing by November. So are these targets feasible? Will it help South Africans achieve herd immunity? Those goals are really important. Let's speak to Professor of Medicine at eNCA, Professor Francois Venter. Francois, thank you for joining me this afternoon. What are you hearing about these timetables? Are we seeing them across multiple provinces, or is just the Western Cape a little faster than the others?
I think traditionally data from the Western Cape has always been richer, more detailed, more accurate than the other provinces. But the sketchy stuff I have heard is that we're getting somewhere between 60 and 70,000 people vaccinated per day in the last week, which is about between a quarter and a third of what we should be doing. So we really are getting further and further behind.
Tell me about this issue of comorbidities. Early on, we were hearing that those who have comorbidities that might be under 60 are also at risk. Are they as at much risk as those considered super vulnerable, those over 60? Should there be a speeding up to get to people with comorbidities, or is that no longer an issue?
No, it certainly is an issue. This stuff is a spectrum. A 45-year-old has a greater risk than a 20-year-old, but an 80-year-old has the biggest risk. In the same way, somebody with uncontrolled diabetes has a greater risk than somebody with very well-controlled diabetes. But we know that diabetes, obesity, and some of the other chronic illnesses are major risk factors for morbidity. So they really need to be treated the same way as somebody who's at a more extreme of age.
So how does that get taken care of now? Obviously, at the moment, we seem to be applying purely an age filter, nothing else. Do you think that is the right approach?
I think what should have been done is rather the approach should have been to take the people at the most extremes of age, say firstly spend the first week mopping up everyone over the age of 80, drop it to 70 the week after. That's what the UK did, and it's a very, the age match strata is very easy because everyone's got some form of identification which lists the age. It's going to be much harder with the chronic illnesses. But honestly, I think that we're so far behind, and we're now firmly into the third wave. We need to be unblocking every possible obstacle. If somebody pitches up with some, with a plausible medical certificate or some proof that they have a serious comorbidity, the site should be empowered to actually take that on spec and to say, let's get you vaccinated as quickly as humanly possible.
But that's not the case at the moment. So how does one ensure that this particular, what the philosophy you're talking about, changes? Can we change it? Can anyone agitate for that?
So it's been something I've been very concerned about. I was very involved in the rollout of both the antiretroviral program as well as all the other HIV components. And I think government has been way too passive in this vaccine program. It's just kind of sat back and said, come and they will, just make the services provision and they will come. And, we saw this in other countries as well, is that the first 20% are really easy to vaccinate because they'll stand in the rain and snow to get the vaccine, But after that, you actually have to try a lot harder. And if we continue to just sit back and be this passive, we're not going to hit our targets. The vaccine sites are doing amazing work. I mean, I think there's some true heroes here in terms of the researchers and the healthcare staff who are doing it. But you cannot sit back and just passively wait. You're going to have to take the service to the people, not just wait for them to pitch up at a few selected sites. So I personally think they should be starting to identify busy healthcare centers, such as the clinics and things, such as diabetic clinics, hypertension clinics, and start advertising major centers where people can pitch up who do have documented comorbidities as soon as possible.
I think that's a good idea. Now, I know that this may be a tricky question for you, but we know we're rolling out the Pfizer at the moment. Is Johnson & Johnson still stuck in some other international process, or are we going to start using the Johnson & Johnson vaccine soon as well?
So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is so much easier. It's not that the Pfizer one is less effective. It's a double jab, and its cold restrictions are just a little bit more onerous than the J&J one. So, the Johnson & Johnson one is just practically that much easier. So there was an obstacle. It sounds like in the last 3 days there was a quality control issue in the United States where the export of the vaccines was frozen, and that sounds like it's been stopped. It's been unfrozen. So hopefully that delivery will come fast. It's just a much easier vaccine to use than the Pfizer one. But to be fair, even one dose of the Pfizer one is still better, far better than nothing. And everyone, what I've been telling my family, my friends, my patients, everybody who listen, is you need to survive the third wave, because unfortunately it's probably going to be over by the time you get your vaccine's immunity kicking in, even if you get vaccinated during the third wave. And just get yourself to a vaccine site. Don't ask which vaccine. They're all really, really good. The only problem with the Pfizer one is you might need to go back for the top-up a few weeks later.
It's very important what you just said, survive the third wave. It sounds a little ominous. Will you just remind us what we should do to survive the third wave?
Yeah, I think I've been asked by about 10 journalists in the last few days, do I think it's the vaccinations that mean that Gauteng and some of the other provinces are being so hit so hard? And unfortunately, that's not the case. It takes a couple of weeks for the vaccine immunity to kick in. So the people who were vaccinated at the start of the government program, which is Monday last week, are probably only going to start seeing the benefits at the end of next week. The third wave we're seeing rising across the country, in some provinces much worse than others. The Free State and the Northern Cape are being absolutely hammered. And in Gauteng, we're seeing a remarkable sudden surge up that's starting to suggest it might even be worse than the first two waves. Each province has had very different waves. For instance, the Western Cape had a very severe second wave following a relatively muted first wave, while Gauteng's first and second wave were actually quite similar. But the scary thing is that Gauteng is now clearly experiencing a third wave, and the numbers are going up so fast that they will eclipse that second wave. But you ask how to protect yourself. It's the boring, non-sexy stuff, which is avoid indoor crowds, get windows open, get doors open, and if you're forced to be with people, wear a mask. And just get yourself to that vaccine site as soon as you are eligible.
And still no medicinal therapeutic possibilities to help people at this point. I mean, there's been a lot of talk, obviously, about things like ivermectin and so on. How do you respond to people wanting to try and find some kind of medicinal protection?
So a whole of the researchers I work with and a whole of people around the world are still desperately trying to find drugs which can prevent you, that can fulfill the role of vaccine, as well as treat early COVID. Which is where many of the people who promote ivermectin say there's a place. We actually do have quite good interventions for once you get really sick. Obviously, it would be much better if we had stuff to prevent you getting there. But once you get to the hospitals, the oxygen supplies, the steroids that we use, those and the ventilation techniques appear we're much better at that than we were at the start of the epidemic a year ago. So there are interventions at that level. We don't have a single thing that works before that, unfortunately, other than vaccines. Unfortunately, with ivermectin, we just don't know if it works. And we don't know what the dose is. We don't know how long you take it for. We don't know whether it works to stop the virus or to treat the virus in the early stages or at the late stages. I'm very skeptical based on the data that I've seen so far that ivermectin has any place in the treatment of COVID. The evidence base for ivermectin is actually lower than for many other drugs that we're looking at the moment, but seems to have found this invested with this almost magical qualities that people have given it over the last couple of months.
Thank you very much for your time, Professor of Medicine at eNCA, Francois Venter.